So anyway, can I open the debate or the questions, please, if anyone would like to? Yeah.
Thanks very much for your talk, Mary. I just have a quick question, and it's probably more, you brought it up at the start of your talk, and it's probably something that's more of an immediate effect really in the next couple of years. It's the relationship with the EU, the UK, and the upcoming David Cameron's commitment to hold a referendum, I think it's in 2017, with you know, about a renegotiated membership of the EU. The upcoming EU referendum in the UK, and I'm just sort of saying that, like, if the UK is moving towards the exit doors, it would have a disproportionate effect on Ireland, because whether it's in trade, whether it's to do with the north or whatever. And I'm just wondering, like, I know you live in London, you know, sometime you live in Dublin as well, and you just mentioned the strength of UKIP. But, like, do you think that is a very real possibility that the UK will move towards the exiting the EU?
Well, it's very hard. I mean, I think that Ed Kelly is going to have a very tough day-to-day with David Cameron, because he's making exactly the point that you're making. It would be disastrous for Ireland if Britain left the EU. It's not something Cameron would want himself, but he, like Ed Kelly himself, he's absolutely dependent on electoral votes and, you know, electoral support, and the tide that's flowing for the UKIP, the UK Independence Party at the moment, is absolutely unstoppable. It's just very interesting that you just pick it up in a kind of a sort of you know, informal narrative experiences. You know, I mean, my hairdresser in Kent, who's completely unpolitical and everything like that, she really is not that interested. But she did say to me, I was really glad to see that the UKIP, they did so well at Eastleigh. I was really glad to see it. And, you know, they came second after the Liberal Democrats, and of course Tories and Labour were third and fourth place. And that's been a pattern. I mean, who can tell? Obviously Cameron is trying to spread, to keep this as distant as possible. 2017 is a long time away. But it is obvious that there is a groundswell, because I think people just feel that, well, I think people feel it here too, that the European Union is too bossy, really. It's interfering in every element of really quite local lives, down to people making cakes. You know, you can't make that sort of cake. The EU is against the European Union. So yes, you're right. It could happen, and it will have a disastrous effect on Ireland. All the more reason why you need all the friends you can get. You must expand your network. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
I agree with you, Mary, but I can see at the minute, like, I actually think that Cameron has been cornered into calling this referendum to try and appease the right wing of his party. And if you're to judge on what he's going by, that he's trying to win support to basically go to the EU to have to basically repatriate powers back. If you look at what happened even last week with George Osborne, who didn't want a cap on bankers' bonuses, that might be a very hard thing to do with the EU trying to renegotiate these powers back, and they might end up that they can't renegotiate these powers back, and they go to the British people and sort of say, oh look, we can't really change this relationship, so it's basically in or out. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes. Well, I think one of the things is really, I mean, it's a kind of sensitive area, but I think, you know, some radical Islamic clerics who Theresa May, the Home Secretary, has wanted to send back to Jordan, send back their own country, and yes, and so on. And well, of course, this is with the European Human Rights Court and so on. But it's all sort of I think in the everyday experience of ordinary people, it's all part of the same thing. They're just being too bossy with us, you know, and trying to control everything. So, well, a week is a long time in politics, and certainly 5 years is a long time in politics. So we don't know what's going to happen, but there's trouble ahead, obviously, as you say. Yeah.
There's a number of constitutional issues, even the Scottish independence referendum.
Ireland has to be aware of this. It'll be interesting to see what Taoiseach Kenny comes back with today.
I understand that, but I'm just saying that, like, the gentleman's about the Commonwealth, but I am saying that they are all interconnected issues if you're looking at the bilateral relationship between Ireland and the UK.
Dermot.
First of all, thanks to both speakers and
Yeah.
thanks to Reform. I'm clearly not a supporter of Reform organisation, but
Okay.
I do genuinely respect people who bring forward
Good.
alternative views. I don't think we've enough discussion in this country. I'm not a nationalist at all. I think both British and Irish nationalism have been fallen. I'm a Dubliner, and I'm a European. I do think it's really important that we have good relations between Britain and Ireland. We're intrinsically linked. I accept all of that. What I would be concerned about from the point of view of good relations is that advocating Commonwealth membership is for very many people that step too far, and that we are far better off. I think in a way you were hinting at that, Mary, that we are far better off building all sorts of relations and interconnections. And rightly or wrongly, Irish people will see the Commonwealth as the British Commonwealth. I hear all the arguments that that's not true anymore, and I can accept the factual basis of that. But what's surely important is that we build real, tangible, solid relationships between peoples. And in that respect, I believe that advocating rejoining the Commonwealth actually hinders that building of relationships rather than building on a relationship. Like most people, I don't think I will ever forget the sight of Queen Elizabeth standing in the Garden of Remembrance. That act was incredible. I think we need to build on that. Setting the target too far, I think, will damage that, and that's one of the reasons why I personally would be concerned about that objective, because I think building the relationships is the key objective.
I agree that there's this, I think there would be a lot of resistance, and all I'm asking for is to talk about these things, really, because that's the first step, is to talk about things. But I think that, just to go back to my, I read through a lot, to my own experience there, where I read through a lot of Irish missionary papers where they were right back from the First World War, where Irish missions, there was, they went to, there were a lot, a lot in China, India. A lot of Loreto nuns went to India and set up convents in India, and very, very well received, actually. And many Indian people who were not at all Christian, nevertheless, wanted their daughters to go to these convents because they thought they were good. It was a good education. So there are all these informal links which are in the deposit of history. So that, Anglo-Irish relations are important, but they're just bilateral relations. I think it's nice to be open to a network of relationships, so that you're open to the big world out there. And as I say, I was quite touched when I read some of these sort of missionary letters. I know missionaries are kind of slightly looked down on now as kind of form of colonialism, but actually a lot of these letters were very nice and very humble, and there was all these Irish nuns in China, and they were trying to save little girls because Chinese families didn't welcome little girls, and they were calling all these little girls Bridget, and and then there was a magazine called the Far East, which was written by Irish missionaries about their work in China, and one of them striking things about these reports were how respectful they were of Chinese culture. They became very, very respectful. They saw how civilized Confucianism could be. They actually had a special column in 1916 about Chinese cooking, which of course is one of the great cuisines of the world. These were missionaries who were writing about their experiences in China, and you had sisters as well, with the help of the British authorities actually in Hong Kong, were setting up hospitals. They were campaigning against, these sisters were campaigning against foot binding for women in China, which is a very reactionary thing imposed on Chinese women. So you have, I just say, let's not forget about that big wide world that we were part of as well, and that we do have links with all these countries. And maybe we wouldn't want to codify it by saying we'll rejoin the Commonwealth, but I think we should remember that deposit and remember those links and cherish them, because they evolve and change, and we should have links with the Commonwealth countries today in that warm spirit. What do you think of that approach?
I'm wide open to exploring and developing relationships, but in order to improve relationships, I would be worried about advocating that the one ultimate step of rejoining, because I think it would do more harm than good. And just one final comment, we should remember that we actually do have an ambassador to the Vatican, and we do have an embassy in the Vatican. So that myth that we don't have one is simply not true. The fact is we don't have the Irish government, or rather the Vatican authorities, won't allow 2 ambassadors to be in Rome, and that's a ludicrous situation for a small country as ours. So it's partially the Vatican's fault that that issue hasn't been dealt with.
But it's the same rule for every country in the Vatican.
Pat, yeah.
That's fine, but we have to deal with our reality here.
Sorry, Pat, yeah.
So, sorry, I just to divert a little. I personally myself, pretty old, and I'm an Irishman, and I've worked in about 40 different countries, and I love Irishness. But I always do regret that we did not grasp the nettle in '48 and avail of membership of the Commonwealth. And having also lived in Northern Ireland, I feel that the carnage that did unfold in Northern Ireland would perhaps never have come to pass had we availed of Commonwealth membership, and indeed the benefits that with Commonwealth membership. Take, for example, the success in Canada, Australia, New Zealand. It's just a comment.
Very interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
Charles?
yes.
Yeah, can I say just one historical thing is interesting, you probably know it, Mary, that the government which declared the Republic took the view that we were no longer in the Commonwealth anyway.
Yes.
Yes.
That there was an ambiguity.
There was.
And people often say 1949 we left the Commonwealth.
Yes.
But in fact, they took the view we didn't leave it, but then there was no negotiation to get us back into it.
Right.
Yes.
That's right. But I think probably I think it's common case that there is a special relationship between these 2 islands. I think that's common case. And the question is how it's best expressed. I mean, one way is we're both in the EU, of course, and then in a bilateral way. And the question is whether it needs to be expressed in this other way. The United States doesn't need to express it in that way, its special relationship. And in a way, I think for this argument, and it's certainly right that it should be explored, I think we need to look what practical effects has it. Are there practical advantages? Now, it appalls me at the moment to see that people from Canada and Australia and all these countries can't come here, their descendants can't come here, and there's difficulties between, and the Commonwealth doesn't seem to advance that kind of thing, either trade or migration. So you wonder what are the practical consequences. And I think if it is to go forward, this idea, and the debate is to be useful, it must point to some practical difference.
Yes.
When we went into the EU, it was practical things were mainly there. And I think that's the gap, and that's the thing that needs to be explored, what practical difference it will make.
That's a terribly important point, Charles. And interestingly, Cameron was in India recently, and he was being extremely warm about it. Naturally, of course, why wouldn't he be anyway? But he went out of his way, and he went to Amritsar and expressed his regret about so on and so forth. And it was an extremely he was very strongly reported all in the British media and so on. But then a commentator was explaining, you know, he wasn't just being Hindophile because he thought Indian culture was wonderful. He's being Hindophile because he believes India is one of the big powerhouses of the future. It's a huge economic power. It's going to be a huge economic power. He desperately wants Indian graduates and Indian undergraduates to come to Britain because that represents an investment in the future, and that, I think, illuminates very much what you were saying. You're absolutely right too that in 1948 Ireland was an ambiguous situation. The Queen Mother of blessed memory, who was a little bit sharper with Dulante than the king, because the king was really a really soft kind of person. You remember he had a stammer and so on, a nervous kind of person, but Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was a very sharp Scots lady, and she said, something to the effect of, well, you've always been half in and half out anyway, haven't you? You know. And but the king said, I still regard you, Mr. Dulante, as the doyen of our Commonwealth, of the High Commissioners. So the king wanted to think of Ireland as being in the Commonwealth, even if, as you say, I think the Queen Mum was nearer to the mark when she said we were half in and half out. That was true.
And it was Churchill, as you probably know, Mary, who said, and when they were in, they were out. And when they were out, they were in. And that was after we had departed from the Commonwealth. Do you remember that? Sorry, Mary, do you want to?
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mary, for the talk. I think Charles said something important there where he said about things being a two-way process. And what you said about the rise of UKIP within England in particular, I think is very important. Because there are times, and some of my best friends are British, there are times when I really feel that John Bull's Other Ireland raises its head again. This sort of thing. You know, with our horse meat scandal and burgers and so forth, I'm sure some of you saw on television the man who was the head of Iceland when asked about the tests which were carried out in Ireland and which showed that there was, you know, horse meat DNA in burgers, and he said, well, that's Ireland for you. You know, but he did have to go back a little bit because, of course, this had commercial implications. So he was rapidly saying that Iceland loved Ireland and buy your burgers there and so forth. I'm happy to say I've never bought one there and will not buy one either. But then the other night, here I am watching Jon Snow and Jeremy Irons is on talking about getting rid of plastic bags all over Europe, as we did decades ago. And when Jeremy Irons brings this up and says, well, the Irish got rid of them, you know, years ago, and this head of the British Plastics Association said, oh, they use bin liners. You know, Jon Snow has a letter coming towards him on that issue. But there's a certain, sometimes I feel a feeling that we're still this
well,
separate.
I think, Mary, you might...
We're not quite... I mean, that would be considered a sort of racist remark if they said it quite a lot.
I think you're being a little oversensitive, Mary, in that, because, I mean, I think that, you know, Iceland is a very down... You haven't shopped there because you don't need to shop there, darling. It's for very poor people, mostly. It's one of the cheapest places you can go.
But I don't think poor people should be denigrated.
I'm not saying that, but it's very much... This is EastEnders territory. It's very popular culture. It's not... The people who run Iceland wouldn't be particularly educated people, if I may say so. And if it was Poland, they'd say, well, that's Poland for you, you know, or... You have that kind of robust... I mean, I live in... I'm based in Kent, and, you know, there's a fairly robust kind of thing about... I mean, what they're saying about Bulgarians, Romanians at the moment doesn't bear thinking about, you know. And I mean, Bulgarians, I keep having to defend Bulgaria. I keep having to say to people, look, the Bulgarians were very decent during the war. They resisted the Nazis, and the king King Simeon of Bulgaria was such a good egg. He was elected once. I keep having to say, this is a very, you know, this culture goes back to St. Cyril and St. Methodius. And oh, they're all coming over here just to take our benefits. We know, you know, all gypsies anyway, aren't they? That's... Okay, yeah. Honestly, sorry. That is the common everyday culture, and you would hear it in Ireland as much about other people as well. You know, about Brits or about Kerrymen or anything. By contrast, I mean, I'm not saying there isn't. Of course, there is. There is always a deposit of, you know, part of the Irishman kind of attitude, and somebody in a commercial situation like that is quick to blame anyway. But I might say Radio 4, the PM programme on Radio 4, which goes out from 5 till 6 and is very influential, fronted by Eddie Mair, they went out of their way to say, you know, the Irish have been very responsible about this. The Irish were the people who discovered that there was horse thing, and they were really, they were very meticulous about it. So there is... You know, you do have the correction as well, but a little bit of, of course, there's always going to be a little bit of to and froing, isn't there? You know.
Philip, yeah.
Would you be able to let the
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Would you be able to let the Nigerian
Would I?
Let the Nigerian delegation say something.
If they would like to, and indeed South Africa, and I think it's interesting, Philip, South Africa is a country that left the Commonwealth, or perhaps more likely were asked to leave the Commonwealth and came back in and joined again. I think that's an interesting...
On becoming democratic.
Yes, quite,
You know,
exactly. After apartheid, I think, was put behind them. Sorry, yes? We got the ambassador here.
Is it about our membership of the Commonwealth?
Yes.
Well, it's interesting. As you may know, Nigeria gained independence in 1960. Unfortunately, we had a military coup in January 1966. That lasted until 1979. Then we adopted the presidential system in 79. Then 83, unfortunately, there was another coup. Then between 1984-85, that government was overthrown 1985 to 93. I think our most turbulent relationship with the Commonwealth was between 1963-66 over the apartheid government in South Africa, then between the military regime of General Abacha, who was in power from 93 to 98. Well, obviously, as you know, as a military government, it didn't fall within the principles of the Commonwealth at that time. And also during the CMAC, the Commonwealth and Monitoring Action Group at that time, that was bent on the promotion of democracy. Well, happily, we returned back to civil rule, as many of you know, in October 1999 till date, which is the longest period since our independence, October 1960. Yes, I would say that there have been a number of practical benefits, you want to call it that way. The area of education, technical assistance and cooperation, promotion of democracy. As you may know, we are also a prominent member of the Economic Community of West African States, and we have worked closely with the Commonwealth in places like Sierra Leone, in Ghana, during elections and other troubled areas. You know that Sierra Leone also had problems with military government. So by and large, yes, I think relations are becoming more and more cordial. As you may know, the Commonwealth Secretary General left Nigeria last week and had very useful discussions. I believe now there's a thought about relaxing visa regime. First of all, they want to start with the diplomatic official. Then probably as we move along, others will follow suit. That, I believe, will promote mobility within the Commonwealth. So yes, for some time there's been a lot of debates. Some people have thought that Nigeria should have left. But as like many of you will know, in most international organizations, even if you don't like what is being discussed there, it's important to still be there anyway. So I think that view appears to have prevailed. So now we have an active and robust membership of the Commonwealth. And I think it's also helping us in stabilizing Africa in the area of elections and other things. We saw the very successful election. In spite of misgivings, elections went very well. So also Ghana recently, Sierra Leone too. So I think there are some valuable benefits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Excellency.
Very much. Sorry. Yep. Philip, sorry.
Sorry, I'll just give my 2 months worth for it. Is this not a great opportunity for us to actively promote and encourage reunification or rejoining the Commonwealth? At the moment, this country and Europe in general is going through an economic depression without precedent. Now, if we had an ally there in some of the other countries, like some of the Commonwealth countries, their economy at the moment is buoyant. I was listening to one of our MEPs, Jim Higgins, back in Ireland West, and he was, in the last referendum that was held, he was advocating that we had no choice. He said we have great friends in Europe and it's going to be a disaster if we vote against the second referendum that they held there, the one that they had to revisit. I only heard him on the radio there 2 weeks ago, and he says Ireland now was faced with the prospect of losing another seat in the European Parliament, and he says it's going to have a very negative impact on Ireland, because he says it's a reduced representation against increasing an enlargement of the Union. So if we had the Commonwealth as there to rely on for some of our exports and some of our surpluses, we wouldn't be as beholden to Europe, because remember, we are a minor player in Europe.
Yes.
I don't know if I have made...
Thank you.
No, that's the
thanks.
very, very good
Yeah.
point, that
Yeah.
you should spread your networks.
Against the other, because
Yeah.
I think the Europeans are only treating us as hail fellow well met.
Yeah.
Like the Germans, I'd say, are the real villains in this economic, because they were lending us the money and getting well paid for the service in order to sell their products, because the new mode of thinking at the time was, oh, you wouldn't have a car unless it was made in Germany, or you wouldn't have a household appliance or whatnot. Look at what Europe has done with the fishing industry. Look at what it did with this. It wiped out the sugar beet industry. Isn't the beef, as I say, totally dependent at the whims of the officials?
And no, that's very interesting, because at the time of that fishing crisis, I think there was tremendous sense of solidarity with Newfoundland, wasn't there? I think Cornwall, Ireland, certainly Munster and Newfoundland sort of joined up to say, we're not going to have our fishing grounds taken. So these things happen perhaps in informal ways too.
Thanks, Mary. We have certainly time for a few more questions, and we better go get something to eat and coffee and tea and so on. So could I have a couple more questions, please? Sorry, you were
David McFarlane. Coming from a mixed background, Britain and Ireland and it's north and south in my blood. At the time when 1922 came about, our family was sundered. We were based in Dublin. That will be 2 generations before me. We were based in Dublin, and those that were employed in Crown service, by Army, Civil Service and so forth, had to go over to Britain. But the family home remained in Dublin, which is still there today. Yeah. Now, that was an emotional happening within our family. Jump ahead, 1948-49, when the Republic, this Republic left the Commonwealth. That was another emotional sundering between the South and Northern Ireland, where I would have had connections. This was a family, again, being sundered. And so, to me, the Commonwealth is a living thing. It has increased over the years, 54 or so new states, with Her Majesty as the figurehead. Now, how many Irish people, Irish-born and Irish-related people, are spread throughout the Commonwealth, throughout the old Empire days? Because as time goes by, through research work, we're finding that more and more Irish either born or related people served in either the military, the police, civil service, the missionaries, the hospitals, the schools, than we have given credit for half the time. It's only coming out now, more and more so, like Mary has spoken about. Researchers now are finding, going through old letters and books and so forth, they're finding that more and more Irish-related people have served, and we should recognise this. Mm-hmm. Now, in relation to EU, there's a problem here, and it's expanding, and it does concern me that is it going to get out of hand? Whereas the Commonwealth has been a steady influence there since Empire days. And we're a part of it. We mightn't be able to join immediately, allowing for what the voters got to say, but we should build up to thinking about it, talking about it. And I think there should be an information office here in Dublin,
Yes.
Because where do you go if you want to know about a Commonwealth country,
Yes.
other than maybe ringing the British Embassy? I used to go to visit to London. It was the Commonwealth Institute, which unfortunately closed down some years ago.
Yes.
And it was so interesting to read about the different nations. And I used to think, well, there's no tricolour flying with all the other Commonwealth countries, you know. But that's an emotional feeling. But it's a constant thing, whereas the EU could break up in the morning.
Well, I think you should write an autobiography about your family, because that's a fascinating insight into Irish history that would have been repeated so many times.
And furthermore, those that before me were educated here in Dublin, in military schools, and both traditions, they told me, lived together, got on well together, until the crack in 1922 came along. Thanks very much.
No, you're very welcome. Just one question, if we may. Bert, you wanted to ask the question before we wind it up. Sorry?
There's no contradiction between membership of the Commonwealth and membership of the European Union.
Yes.
We can be members of both. In Malta, Britain,
Cyprus,
Yes.
It's not a contradiction in terms.
Robin, can I make one quick comment to something Mary Henry said?
Yes,
I always remember, and it's a long time ago, the Evening Press, there was a headline, and the first line of it was, "The only English-born member of U2 was arrested on drug charges today." So we can just be as, comment on them as they can on us.
Fair enough. Very good, very good.
Can I ask a question to you, Robin?
Yes.
I mean, one of the most strongest voices in the Commonwealth at the moment is Don McKinnon, I think, who was from New Zealand. He's just written an autobiography about his life in the Commonwealth. But when the Queen dies, do we know what will happen? Who could be the head of the Commonwealth then? Could it be somebody in India? Could it be somebody in Australia? Could it be somebody in South Africa, in Nigeria?
It's a very good question, and we have been into it. We have been in touch with the Commonwealth office in London. People have talked about it and debated it, and frankly, they don't know.
It's open.
It's open, Mary. Yes. It's not written down in any constitution, including the new charter, which is just, as you know, been issued.
Yes.
So it's open. But I hear that, now whether it'll happen or not, that Charles is interested if he becomes king.
Yes.
He is interested in being head of the Commonwealth, but it's open.
Robin, I will point out that there are two elected representatives here, and one of them is a party member.
My apologies. Oh my goodness. There you are. Sorry. All right, thank you. Thank you.